Around the world, there are dozens of countries where the population is actually shrinking. You would think that you should avoid countries like this for investment, but I'm going to tell you why some of these countries could be exactly where you should invest. One of the challenges that I occasionally hear about some of the countries that we talk about, particularly in Eastern Europe, is they're actually losing population largely due to emigration. And people say these are smaller countries. Like, where's the opportunity here when things aren't growing the way it would be in Indonesia, for example, or countries with rapid population growth? But the important thing to keep in mind as a nomad capitalist is you want to diversify not just to a second basket, but to multiple baskets around the world. And each of those baskets has its own purpose. Not every basket is to maximize your capital as much as possible. Other baskets increase your freedom, increase your opportunities, give you more ways to travel, give you more ways you can invest. I'm going to tell you how you can use shrinking countries to do that. But let's talk about some statistics from one of my favorite websites, Visual Capitalist. These are the 20 countries with the fastest declining populations. A lot of them are post-Soviet countries. Some of them are even in the European Union. And since the mid-1900s, global population has been on a steep upward trajectory. And yet since the late 1900s, these countries have been shrinking. Let's look at the 20 countries that are expected to shrink the most by 2050. First up with Bulgaria, 22.5% decline expected. We saw this population peak in Bulgaria right around the time the Soviet Union collapsed, about 9.5 million people. Back a little bit before that, 1987, 9 million people, down to 5.4 projected by 2050. That is largely due to folks leaving. Bulgaria is part of the European Union, and so a lot of young people say, hey, I'd rather go and live in Germany and work and earn a lot more money. Yeah, it'll cost me more to live, but I'll make a lot more, and net I'll save. I'm live in Ireland, live in France. Hey, I can make money anywhere. I'm living in Spain. Sounds like a better lifestyle. And yet Bulgaria, as a response, has a very low flat tax rate, one of the lowest tax rates in Europe, both for individuals and companies, because they want to encourage people, because they understand, in part, for the last 3.5 decades, people have been leaving. And they realize, unlike some countries in Europe, that you have to be competitive. You could live in Bulgaria. You could pay that very low rate of taxes, and after a certain number of years, you could become naturalized as a Bulgarian citizen and then have the option to live anywhere that you want in Europe. That's just a taste of what we're going to talk about here today. Lithuania, it's going to lose about just about as much, 22.1%. Latvia right there, 21.6%. Ukraine, fortunately, will probably get worse, 19.5%. Serbia, 18.9%. Bosnia, 18.2%. Croatia, Moldova, Japan, Albania. So basically, we're looking at the Balkans and the Baltics plus Japan. Japan's issue is entirely different. Many people in Japan don't speak another language, and so it's not so much an issue of emigration, it's just an issue of people aren't reproducing. That's an entirely issue altogether. That's the same issue that also applies to Cuba. Birth rates just aren't keeping up. Romania, Greece, interestingly enough, 13.4%. Estonia, Hungary, Poland, Georgia, a little bit lower at 11.8%. Some of these post-Soviet countries actually peaked in like 1987, 1990, 1991. Ever since then, it's been down as people have left. And if you were in some of these post-Soviet countries in the 90s, it was a mess. People went varying places. Some of them have eventually come home. And I think to some of these countries in the European Union, as it's become more developed, they are coming home, but not enough. Even Portugal, Cuba, and Italy. I saw a story a couple of years ago that there's just not enough job opportunities in cities in Italy, and that some people are leaving because they, again, have EU passports. They can go and work other places. Some kids are like actually going reverse, back to the farms, the way Jim Rogers would appreciate, because they just like the slower paced lifestyle, and it's actually not that much worse for them, or maybe in some cases it's better for them economically to go back and just not have this job in a city, but to rather work on the farms. So with the exception of Japan and Cuba, these are basically countries in Europe. Portugal, while it has offered a lot of opportunities with things like golden visas, if you're a Portuguese citizen, you do have a lot of options. Portugal itself, there are a lot of places where the wages just are really, really low. I mean, like, you could hire someone for the same wage you'd pay outside of the European Union in like an Eastern European country. I mean, there are people in Malaysia, for example, that make more money than people in Portugal, which for such a Western country just seems weird. Some of these countries just have a history of immigration. It's just kind of a cultural thing. People talk about leaving Ireland. People talk about how rent is expensive and housing is just, it's totally crazy. And yet Ireland, by some metrics, has the #1 highest income in the world right now. And so Ireland has a history of immigration, but they've created these job opportunities by having a competitive tax rate that are so good that people are coming, and those numbers are not shrinking. Ireland probably would have made this list not too long ago. What I take from this is, some of the countries that we've talked about in the Balkans, Georgia, the Baltics, they are losing population. And so you could argue, why would I invest in these places? They're losing population. What capitalism needs is growing population. That's why those Asian economies, those African economies, just a little bit lesser extent, some Latin American economies are where you want to put your money because there's just, people aren't reproducing in all over Europe, but these people, Germany might, be flat. These countries are losing people. And there's some countries here you could say that about. Moldova, yeah, I'm not so sure what the opportunities are. North Macedonia, I was interested. I took a look at that. I found it hard to hire people there. I just found it really difficult. The tax rate's good, but there's just not enough there to make it interesting. And they have a citizenship program that really hasn't worked. Maybe it'd be something that would be interesting to a niche number of people like me to hire a few people and get citizenship and just deal with it. But there's just no competitive angle in some of these countries. But on the other hand, you have great lifestyle countries: Portugal, Italy, Greece. Portugal's getting rid of its tax incentive, but Greece and Italy still have a pretty good one, modeled after Switzerland, kind of the discount version of Switzerland's low tax regime for foreigners, because they've realized we need to bring people in. They have, in Italy, all these €1 properties. Now, you've got to put money into the property. It's not just €1 out the door, but if you're willing to go to smaller areas, you can get properties incredibly affordably. And so the first thing that I look at, this list is I say, for people who want a lifestyle, whether you want to move there or whether you just want to have the option to move there, some of these countries are starting to realize we need to do something. You could go to Italy, become a tax resident in Italy because you live there more than half the year and because it's your home. You can get either a lump sum tax of 100 to 125,000 euros if you're making a lot of money, or you can get a reduction of up to 90% of your taxes if you live in a place that's not as successful, mostly smaller areas in the south. And even after that expires, you can get it down to 50 to 70%. You can work towards an Italian passport, which if you already have assets and you don't need the job there, you can work anywhere you want, the European Union at that point, but you can travel anywhere in the world. And if you're American or Canadian and you're worried about the baggage of your passport, an Italian passport may give you all the benefits without quite as much as the baggage, because you don't need to rely on getting a job in Italy. But there's that lifestyle that some people like, the dolce vita, or Greece, people like to go to Greece. And so some of these countries are like, we got to do something. And you get that lifestyle at a discount. Their historically crazy tax rates don't apply to you for 5, 10, 15 years. You have a way to enjoy a better lifestyle. Beyond that, some of these countries may never allow immigration. Japan is notoriously anti-immigration. A lot of the people that I know who quote unquote live in Japan, they just kind of go on 90-day tourist visas. They're in, they're out. It seems like Japan doesn't really concern themselves too much with that because it's just, unless you're married to a Japanese citizen, it's kind of difficult to get in there. And yet, look at how cheap you can buy some of these properties outside of the cities and in Japan. It's the same thing as what you'd find in some of these parts, in Italy. Milan is incredibly expensive. I guess Rome is expensive, but get outside of those cities not so far and you can find some incredible deals. I mean, you can buy beautiful old villas, for a fraction of what you pay in a place like the United States, where you're not losing 11, 12, 13% of your population over the next 3 decades. And so from a lifestyle perspective, and then from a diversification standpoint at the back of that, Italy in particular, I think, stands out. I think Greece is less likely to naturalize people, but if you want to move somewhere, good taxes, low prices, opportunity to have a top-tier passport, that wouldn't happen if Italy was growing hand over fist. And yet, there are some places where there are prime opportunities. Prices in Belgrade have gone up. It's been one of my most successful pied-à-terre property investments. I didn't buy it to make money. I bought it to be able to go and do business in that region and, not have to stay in a hotel when I'm there and just, like the comforts of having that. But it's actually done very, very well because there's a lot of regional interest. People from Montenegro, for example, they all want to have property in Belgrade. Serbia is open to people not just from the West, but Russians go there. You've had increased interest from, the Gulf. They've done some connections there. So that price, has gone up. You could have bought real estate in Belgrade and done pretty well. In rural Japan, you can buy farmland pretty cheap. Japan actually has more openness to foreigners and some of that stuff. You can buy houses, again, for next to nothing, that people are trying to get rid of it. I look at this as not only a lifestyle cost, but when I talk about a country like Serbia, that's a country where they're not really implementing a CBDC. People went during the pandemic for more freedom. You've got a decent amount of tax favorability if you have a business overseas and you can structure that properly. They're talking about making citizenship more easy. And by the way, it's not an EU country, so it's not as good of a passport as Italy, but it's a pretty good neutral passport. When you look at how Italy has lowered their golden visa prices, they have the tax deals, they have the incentives in villages. Portugal's offered the immigration incentives. Tax incentive gone, immigration incentive still there. Georgia just made citizenship easier. If you would have invested in property in Georgia a few years ago, you would have made a lot of money. And I know, because I did invest in property a number of years ago. And I've seen people invest and then sell their properties. They made a lot of money. Serbia is talking about making citizenship really easy, as fast as a year. Again, Serbia is a good neutral passport. Georgia is a good neutral passport. They're tax friendly for the right kind of person. Portugal, Italy, Greece are all top tier passports, arguably better than the U.S. The U.S. isn't going to give you this level of flexibility. They're not going to offer you a multi-year 90% discount on your taxes. Sure, you can go to Detroit and you can perhaps get a house for $1. I guess some of that stuff is cleared up. Would you rather live in Detroit or in southern Italy in an old, beautiful village? And then you've got places like Lithuania in the Baltics where there's, a tech hub. Yes, some of those people are moving, but there's still some smart people there. Are you going to invest in these places and make huge returns? If you did it exactly right, you could have made huge returns in something like Georgia real estate. Yes, some people were really making money. They had great yields on Airbnb because these countries are more favorable in some cases towards things like that. They want people to come in. They want to make investing easy. They want to make it profitable for you, unlike the Western countries where they're shutting that down. And yeah, you probably could have, let's say, doubled your money in a couple of years in Georgia real estate, maybe even better than that. But what I see here is you're building a global citizen sandwich. You're going to live in one place. You're going to have a plan B in a different place, and you're going to invest in another place. Nomad Capitalist helps people figure that out. If I live in Serbia and I have a residence permit, or that residence permit becomes a passport at some point, and I have the ability to have a passport without a lot of baggage. Now, obviously, there's a couple countries that maybe, have a beef with Serbia, but not a lot. And it's a pretty powerful passport for being outside of the EU. That's going to give me an option that if I'm a Westerner, it really expands my options. And so if having a property in a certain country makes it easier for me to get citizenship, even if I just make a small return, even if I made no return on that, heck, even if I lost a few bucks, wouldn't the ability to get that residence permit or get that passport and then have that lifestyle option and have that in my back pocket is something that's different? Georgia, Serbia, Macedonia, North Macedonia, these countries are a little bit different. The European Union countries are going to be more what you're familiar with. But if you want a place when the fur starts flying to go, I'd like to have some countries that are a little different. If I have a good amount of capital, in my opinion, should go to stuff that you're not optimizing for the best return. You're optimizing for freedom, lifestyle, and optionality. Smaller countries, plus the need for more people, that keeps the government in check. We're going to double your taxes. Everybody needs to run for the hills. Yeah, they'll do that sometimes. But look at what these countries have in common. They've generally lowered tax rates. Hungary, one of the lowest corporate tax rates. Estonia, very favorable tax situation for many companies. Romania has low tax regimes. Poland, not as much. Georgia has it. Portugal, okay, they got rid of theirs. They're saying they're sick of it. It's not fair. Okay, fine, it's not fair. We'll go somewhere. We'll go to Italy. Look at the tax favorability in these countries and look at the lifestyle favorabilities. Smaller countries, plus they need more people, plus things aren't going the right way. That keeps the government in check. People who are watching this, they live in a country, the U.S., Canada, Australia. The government does whatever they want. You want to get away from that, maybe it's good to go to a place where they're a little bit of the underdog. These countries, again, have incentives to attract people, and they tend to have residence and citizenship programs. Again, let's bring some bodies in. Let's bring some dollars in. Let's bring some euros, some money. And Albania is another one, by the way. There's some opportunities there. So not all these places are favorable. But if we look at, you've got a pot of money, put part of that money towards stuff that may not be perfectly optimized for returns, but it's going to make sure you keep the returns, almost like a geopolitical emergency fund. where, hey, listen, what happens when the US or your country says, yeah, you can't invest in crypto, or you can't invest in that kind of crypto, or the crypto exchange says we don't take Americans, or the crypto project, hey, we're not raising funds for it. Do you know how many Americans I've talked to over the years who've lost millions because their passports stopped them from investing in certain projects? If that came to pass and I was losing millions, wouldn't it be nice to be like, oh, yeah, I'm also Georgian. That'd be a good thing to do. And if I had to allocate a small percentage of my assets to building that optionality that funded the real estate or funded the residence or funded the citizenship through having some kind of business or real estate or something in that country, I'd say that's a win. That's why. And I've talked about why you want passports that people turn their nose up at. I've talked about why, sure, if you can get Italian citizenship, I'm all for it. Have that optionality. In 99 of 100 cases, have that access to the European Union. There's lots of different countries you can choose from no matter what happens. But I want to have a passport that's weird, because who knows what's happening. And these countries, you can say they're failing, but they could play a part of your portfolio. You're still going to do the investment stuff. And some of them could be investments if you know what you're doing. But put part of your capital to work to buy optionality.